Hello and welcome to Locked In FPL. I am back for the Gameweek 7 preview. I'm, of course, FPL Nima, and I'm joined by my co-host, special guest today, FPL Fran. If you don't already know him and you've been living under a rock, do check out the link to his profile on both the video and podcast descriptions, as well as of his YouTube channel. My personal favorite has always been Fran's cheat sheets that he does, but his deadline stream is pretty kick-ass too. So welcome to the channel, Fran. It's nice to finally have you here. I know we've been planning for the first few weeks of the season, and yeah, it's couldn't be a worse game week for both of us to talk.
Yeah, good. Which is why we're also, I suppose, looking ahead to something that's not so bad. But pleasure to be here. Really happy that you actually started the show this season, and yeah, just happy to hear.
Thank you, mate. And yeah, everyone in the chat, please do get your questions in as always. We will star them for the Q&A, which I'll timestamp at the end in case you can't be here for the whole thing. We're going to go right into it today so that we can also make sure we cover Game Week 7 more, because I think we want to spend a bit of time getting to know Fran, how he first got into FPL, maybe some of his favorite memories, as we do with every guest. I always like people to kind of get to know you as the person and the FPL manager and your style before we go into like what your plans are for the week ahead. And yeah, a couple shout outs before we go actually. So Robin Popperwell first in here. Yo dudes, no Haaland or Salah this weekend. Let's dance. Thanks for tuning in, Robin. Getty FPL, good evening all. Very happy as a Palmer owner. Looking forward to this one. Teacher Lucian, one of our master key holders. Anyone reading Twitter live messages? So yes, I don't think the replies go through on here, but it does show them. So we'll put your messages up on screen, buddy. And Claire FPL evening all. So yeah, we'll keep putting the questions and star them and, show them as we go. But let's go into you, Fran. Last year, you had an incredible finish, 437th in the world. As well as, I'm assuming your favorite memory will be from that season because of the rank. But yeah, separate to the kind of getting into your favorites and last year's success, how did you first start? When did you start playing FPL? How long have you been playing? Like, what kind of manager are you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've been playing that long. If you look at my season history, you'll see that I have two really extremely high rank finishes, like a 2-point-something mil and a 6 mil finish. And that was simply because I never played FPL properly, right? So I think there was one season where I joined a work league and I graduated from uni. I got let go from that company because it was a crypto company and crypto had crashed at the time. And then I never revisited my team. So I think that was like one of my 2 mil finishes. And then the season after that, a friend of mine just challenged me to like 8 game weeks towards the end of the season. I didn't really know what it was all about, and then I just built another team again and then abused all my chips and beat him for those 8 game weeks to win a bet. After that, I didn't play the season after, and then it was COVID. And during COVID, that was when I actually started the YouTube channel with my friend, and I became actually really engrossed into watching like the Premier League, because we were doing a YouTube channel that was sort of post-match analysis, I would say, and tactics really, with a friend of mine. He's an Arsenal fan, and we were just covering all sorts of games, Champions League, mostly Premier League really. And then I started playing FPL like properly all the time around then. And that's when I had, I think, my sort of maybe top 40K finish, I think something like that, or 55. I can't even remember what it was. But that season, I just sort of, I did silly things. Like I took -4s, -8s every week. I didn't even know that double game weeks existed. So I like triple captain Kane, things like that. And then actually, because I had a reasonably good finish, I started creating content in that specific off season for Euro 2021, if you remember that. And there was a Euro game there that was really popular, and I started making videos because I think generally I've always been watching a lot of European leagues, right? So I felt like there was some sort of content that I could create. I didn't see other people creating too much content at the time. I think it was mostly Dan, FPL Mate, and obviously Andy, Let's Talk FPL, that I saw making videos then. But then I saw, okay, there was a bit of a niche there, and people really liked I actually created like an informal version of the cheat sheet then, and people really liked it for the Euros. And then I was like, okay, I'll probably look into actually how to play FPL properly. But it honestly was a bit of a slow process, because I think, and I speak to people about this, but I think you can have, let's say, an eye test approach to football, but that doesn't necessarily translate to doing well in FPL, because you have to understand the kinks of things like later in the season, single game weeks and double game weeks, and trying to reevaluate how you appreciate players. Like, it's not always about this player is just better because I've watched him play football and he's very technical, etc. Like, a good example, I suppose, this season is like someone like NDI from Everton. He's probably a lot more aesthetically pleasing than Dwight McNeil. I know McNeil scored a screamer last week, but the point is, most people would still think that they gravitate towards someone like that because they like the flair, they like the quality of the player. But then Dwight McNeil, plays more, I mean, arguably the same amount of minutes, but he has set pieces and things like that. And sometimes people, I guess, like miss that side of evaluating like what leads ultimately to FPL points. So over the years, I started getting in touch with people who were analyticsy focused, and that sort of merged, I guess, my play style a little bit. Like, definitely, I watch every game possible. I think even when we're at FPL meets, I get pretty annoyed when I can't watch the 3 p.m. games, so I'll just pull my phone out and I'll watch. But yeah, that's me. And then I try to look and understand like why data backed managers were doing so well, and trying to understand like their approach to the game. Whether it's just not just like necessarily, like minutes of players being 95, but just like even understanding why they even believe data back processes work, how models worked, how solvers worked. And I sort of incorporated that approach over time. And I think I spent a lot of time through my own sort of work on the cheat sheet series, just looking at all the teams, all the players in the game. And it's not really a case where every game week I just really look at my team and think forwards about my team. I just try to think about the game as a whole, the entire list of players. And I think using analytics has really helped to sort of flesh out my game quite a bit. And to be honest, that sort of single game week, double game week aspect of the game is something I don't love, but I appreciated how important it was to have things like models and solvers to actually understand how to sort of reorganize my eyes really to being able to make decisions in FPL week to week that I liked. And then over time, I think over the last 2 years, I'd say I started incorporating data probably maybe a season and a half ago, maybe around game week 26, when, if you remember, there was like a pretty popular wildcard around Brentford and Brighton players because the really, really like exceptional FA Cup results. I think like Tottenham lost as well. A couple of crazy results happened. I think Leicester too, potentially. And that created some weird blanks and double game weeks. And I was actually at the time still speaking to, a friend of mine, Schadenfreude, who I also do a pod with, and it's a little bit more analytics based. And that's when I started using a bit more of like models and solvers as part of my game. And since then, I've probably taken a bit more of an analytics approach, like full time. Last season, I'd say I played the full year with it. But what I try to do more often than not is I'm very comfortable adjusting the minutes of my own players. I pretty much, in my head, I'd say I have like a minutes model of all the players that I'm interested in. And I try to think tactically about what managers feel, what the state of the game is. And I think that's sort of that's sort of my final evolution of me as a manager. So a bit of a hybrid manager of sorts.
I think it's fascinating because, I actually still have your number saved as Total Tactics Fran. So
Yeah, that's
like
true.
at the time, I didn't see you as like an FPL content creator. Like it was just like you were like a football analyst in my eyes, and like you had interesting views. You supported Real Madrid. You weren't like a Premier League guy. So I was like, oh, he's not my rival. He seems nice. He's a lovely guy. So yeah, over this time, I've obviously got to know you better. You've come to the meets, as you mentioned. Frustrating they don't show 3:00 games in the UK. A bit mental for that. But it's interesting, the analytics side, because I think I'm someone who I do consider myself analytical in the way I play. But I also realize that I go very much against most kind of algorithms and models a lot of the time. And I think it may be that part of me that's similar to you in having my own minutes in my head and kind of disagreeing with short-term trends that maybe a model will take longer to catch up with. So obviously Simon and I, we've been doing the show. You were a guest with Simon a few weeks back when I couldn't make it on Expected Grass. And, it's fascinating because Simon's goal is by the end of the season to basically turn me into a full-time analytics manager. And when I was on Wildcard last week, he really tried to get me to have Bruno instead of Luis Diaz on my wildcard. And then the next night I was on here on Locked in FPL with Brad Mayer FPL, and he also was saying about Bruno. So then when the red card happened, like I just remember Simon messaged me, was like, at least I didn't convince you to buy Bruno. Now I know you have him, so we'll talk more about Bruno later. I just want to talk a little bit more about your favorite memories, I guess, because we've learned a little bit about kind of how you took your more, I guess, grass-based play style of like actually watching games, the eye test. And you've explained how that doesn't always translate to like success in FPL. And I totally agree with that. Like there's players who are incredible football players, but in FPL, they might not be a good asset based on other factors. So with that in mind, what's like your most fun memory? Was it like a certain chip? I know you said double game weeks aren't really your thing, but was there like a big triple captain, a bench boost? Was there like a sub 5K, sub 10K game week rank or something that you like really vividly remember?
I think it was just last season in game week 3, I think, where I just had Sterling and Gusto, and they both did the business in a game. So like Gusto did 2 assists to Sterling's brace, and that was like probably like the biggest rank rise I've had. And I think what I tend to do is I don't really look at my life rank. I try to think about a lot of like my elite peers and think about like what their ownership is like, what their team structures are like. And I definitely knew that both of those picks were definitely like uniquely owned. It wasn't like at the time, only elite managers owned Sterling and Gusto. I think most of them, to be honest, benched Gusto, didn't have him, or didn't have Sterling either. So that was like really fun for me because I'm and that felt like a product of me being confident in sort of my own minutes. Because I do play with models, but I'm very happy to adjust the minutes, and those transfers were like even the result of me playing that specific team was because of that. Now that was just luck, right? Like in the sense that I'm not going to expect that ever again, but that was just fun and I just enjoyed it. Particularly because I think in game week 1, I remember like a lot of the comments that I was getting was just, how can you start the season with Kai Havertz? He's a terrible player, which is funny now when we think about Kai Havertz. I think a lot of people rate him. But it just shows you as well that, sometimes it's fun to get rewarded with doing something that you've done yourself, and that no one is sort of on that same boat. And that experience is always nice in FPL.
I love that. I think there's a few questions in the chat that I am starring, guys. So welcome to the stream. Speed now, though. We will timestamp the Q&A at the end, so we will answer you. If you can't watch the whole show, you can always go to the timestamp for the live Q&A. Lucian in the chat says, completely vouch for Fran's insights. Please pick his brain and dig deep, Nima. So we will try. We will try. FPL Discomfort, Epic Collab Show, FPL Sparta, all right. Or a few more shout outs before we keep going. Nehal Kulkani, Let's Go Fran. Podner, what's up, Podners? My fellow Bruno Podners, not a red card. Yeah, it is shocking that like the VAR wouldn't overrule something like that. I just... The whole thing is just pure incompetence. I'm just so fed up of this like closed shop mafia, PGMOL, zero accountability. It's like I've never seen something more embarrassing, and like they're just there like using VAR to like not make their mates look bad rather than making correct calls. It's just absolutely appalling. But yeah, I mean, we'll talk more about Bruno, I'm sure, because I did see that on the next slide. He is in your team, so. Well, I should say was, but we'll also talk about we'll also talk about that. We're almost ready to go into the kind of, I guess, the game week ahead and how you're doing, how you feel about the season so far, which is what everyone's really here for. But just a few more final things I want to find out just about you as a manager, you as a FPL fan. So I guess this question I'm going to take now from Lucian, because this is really relevant for this section of the pod, I think, when we're getting to know you. So he says, please educate us on how to use hindsight to play FPL this season. So this is a fascinating question, right? Because I don't think it's for the FPL Q&A later where it's like, should I buy this guy? Should I hold that guy? This seems a bit more philosophical. So I think we'll give it a couple of minutes. But yeah, well, what are your thoughts on that?
Using hindsight?
Yeah, like how would you use it this season? Like to play FPL. Because I think everyone always says, right, like, oh, I was going to get this guy, but and then I got that guy. And then it's like, but what do you do with these hindsight moments? How do you tap into them? How do you use them to make a better decision in the future, I suppose? Or how do you know that the decision you're making now isn't just a knee-jerk based on hindsight and it carries value? And like, I guess, how do you weight your decisions depending on the outcome and regardless of whether it was positive or negative?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of people do tend to apply like the sort of hindsight element where it's like, oh, I had this player in my draft, or I was going to go for this transfer. And I think ultimately you just need to be completely real with yourself and say that you've gone for a certain decision, that you probably backed your thought process to getting to that decision. And whilst you might have considered, let's say, a bunch of different sort of lines past that you wanted to go with your team, with your drafts, whenever you play FPL, that ultimately you have to deal with, like, the consequences of your team is just footballing outcomes, I would say. If you've considered certain players, you don't have them and they did well, the reality is you don't own them. So you just need to get over it, is my thoughts and feelings. you can definitely apply hindsight in terms of like, well, one thing I was thinking about in hindsight is, okay, what happens if like if a team is performing? What happens if a player is performing? You can adjust your expectations of players as you go along the season, but you also need to understand that how, I guess, inconsequential 1 game week or even 5 game weeks, 6 game weeks now, how inconsequential that is to really, in my opinion, changing your belief on a certain player. And I think Luis Diaz was such a good example of that this season, where he scored 5 goals in 5. His manager also recognizes that that's overperformance, and he's playing 70 minutes a game. You can't have crazy expectations for someone, or you at least have to level set them, right? Even if you think he's slightly better than when he was playing under Klopp, how much better can he get? Are we talking he's actually better than Prime Salah right now? Because he's not. And those are the kind of things where I think people need to have a consistent approach to that. And the same thing goes with someone who's been completely underperforming, with someone like Bruno, for example. I mean, not the red card, we'll ignore that, but yeah, he missed a lot of chances. He created a lot of chances that somehow kind of got ruled out because of the Brighton game, if you remember that. But things like that do happen, and you can't let points sort of being a small little outcome change your mind on certain players. Now, I do think that over time, sometimes we tend to see like trends very quickly. So if Dibbling gets really good minutes, if Rodgers gets really good minutes, a lot of us have jumped on trends like that very quickly. But to really have like a consistent thought process across, let's say, all price points, across all positions, team structures even, I think you need to make sure that you just have a consistent thought process, and that when hindsight comes, that you just understand that it's only going to change your mind on certain players, maybe like 2 to 5% at a time. So
it's a very small amount,
flexible, but understand that things don't change that quickly. And I think that this happens very often because people, you know, might let's say look at their initial draft and think that they're planning for certain fixtures. Things didn't happen. Let's say Arsenal kept 3 clean sheets out of 5 in a really bad run of games. They're not going to keep a pace of 3 out of 5 clean sheets for the rest of the season, even in spite of, let's say, really good fixtures right ahead for the short term, which included last week, things like that. So I think that it's helpful to use alternative sources of information, like, for example, market data that we have, potentially models that we have, just the level set, right? Because yes, of course, you might be a little bit high, but you also need to understand where you're low on things. And I think that really helps, because when I was sort of listening to, let's say, maybe even, let's say, some betting podcasts, I think one sort of piece of insight that I thought was really interesting was that, let's say, if you're betting overs and unders for a season, like where people are going to fall, where people are going to sort of place if they're doing poorly or you expect them to do poorly. Ultimately, if you rate all these players and all these teams to do really well, it also means that you equally are down like underrating, I suppose, other teams and other players. And I think people don't always do that in the same way. And then also when fixtures actually get better, so for example, like Jared Bowen is a good example where maybe Bruno is not someone that is everyone's cup of tea, but Jared Bowen, for example, has Ipswich at home next week. How bad can he really be, even if West Ham look really poor? And I think those are the kind of decisions where you need to not let hindsight get too much in the way of how poor things can be, because someone like Bruno or someone like Bowen are not going to blank for the rest of the season, the same way that Luis Diaz is not going to go 1 goal a game this season. And I'll put, you know, I'm happy to put a lot of money on that. And that's pretty much what I would say.
No, I think that's spot on. And I think that's a really nice addition to this segment. In terms of just generally as well, I think what it comes down to me as well, just to conclude this and go into game week 7, is it's like, has something changed, right? So like for Lucien, like, has something actually materially changed in the reasoning behind that decision? So like for me, for Diaz, that blank in the early sub and then Jota getting the brace of assists, essentially, I look at that and I'm like, has anything materially changed since before I picked him on the wild card? Like, everything that happened was what I knew, which is that A, he might not continue scoring every single game. B, he's probably going to get subbed early. And, you know, like, I knew that stuff. And C, the points might get spread around between their attack, and that ultimately Diaz, Jota, whoever are probably not going to cover Salah. Like, Salah covers Salah in that team and no other attacker will. So it's kind of like, if none of that's changed, then it's like, why am I then saying knee-jerk selling Diaz?
Yeah.
Now, I bring this up as an example because I had a guy, I was chatting to a friend on Twitter, and he started the season as a United fan. He started with, I think, Garnacho. Garnacho didn't start. Sold him for a hit for like Ahmad. Then there was like a game where there was a leak that Ahmad didn't start, but he did. So then he -4'd him out for Garnacho. Then like the week he sold Garnacho on Team News, then that time he got an assist off the bench. And like within like 3-4 weeks, he was just like going back and forth between them. And that's why I kind of used the Diaz Jota example, because it reminded me of his story. And I was like, that's the example of like what has changed, because like, why are you so quickly changing your decision each time? Like, what was the logic and reasoning behind why you went this way? And unless anything majorly changed, I'm talking like suspensions, injuries, changing managers, like opposition is weaker than we think in the next game or better than we thought, fixtures aren't as good as they appeared, whatever it might be. If none of those things have changed, it's like, I might as well just roll my free transfer and then just get more info. I don't know if that makes me a patient type of manager. I think maybe you're more maverick. You say you've taken a hit already, and I think this is a good segue into Gameweek 7. You know, we've got Champions League games on tonight. We've got Europa League games on. But I believe you've already used some moves and maybe even taken that hit.
Yeah.
So this was your Gameweek 6 team. You're doing better than I am. As far as I can see, you're in the top 2 million, which I'm not, I don't think, anymore. You can see the points are still kind of close, but they are starting to stretch out. So, you know, you're not really that far off. You're about 50 points off top 100K, which is still pretty good. That's like where I aim to start the season. That's my target, 100K. About 10 game weeks in, and we're getting dangerously close to that now. I then look at where I actually am and see how realistic it is to either get 100K. So am I going to chase all season, or can I maybe aim for 10K, 5K, triple digit rank? Like, what's the next best thing, right? Yeah, so from 10K, you're 75 points, 100K, 51 points. 60 is not much there yet. But as we get closer to game week 10 and beyond, I think these gaps will get bigger. So still all to play for. Before we talk about your moves you've made and where you're at, how you feel about the season so far, I also wanted to show this data point as well. So I'm going to timestamp this for the podcast viewers. It's a 20-second minute, because I think this is relevant to what we're saying about the gaps between ranks and where we are compared to where we want to end the season. So this is from ŁukaszZ at F_analytic on X. This is actually the Elite 1000 median rank that they visualize quite nicely with data from FPL research and FPL review as well. Now, this, I've actually seen this a few seasons in a row, and it's always served as something that's reassured me that it's like there's a marathon ahead, because it shows you, for the podcast viewers who can't see this, it shows you kind of, I guess, the median rank of everyone in the Elite 1000 who historically will have been like top managers who have top finishes and regularly get these top finishes. And it kind of shows you like their rank at this time. So in game week 6 in prior years, it was actually better than this year. So this year is 2.8 million is the median rank at game week 6. Whereas last year it was 1.4 million, the year before 550K, the year before that 166K. But despite it kind of getting worse each year, it doesn't seem to have a major correlation with their final ranks when we ultimately get to game week 38. So you see that still like people are finishing in the top 65K, 37K, 53K, 30K. So I'd like to think that that is still the case, that, you know, like there's 6 weeks, anything can have happened. And ultimately, whatever rank you are now, you know, there's stories of people being like 1 million rank in game week 10 last year and then finishing in the top like 3,000. So I still think like my way of thinking is I need to get to the top million by game week 10. That's the first part, because I need to be like, I want to be at a 5-digit rank. And then from there, it's like, okay, what can you do? How far can you push? But what are your thoughts on this elite median rank? And obviously like your own season so far with this as the painting of the context, because I use it as a reassurance that like there's lots of people who are historically great managers in FPL who aren't having great starts. And yet every season without fail, they will bounce back and finish very high up. So like, I believe that the long-term trend is still to be trusted, and that if you play in the right way and you keep making the right decision, and no matter how much the outcomes are going wrong, eventually you will let the field of players around you make the mistakes that let you rise. Like, I'm not trying to force moves just because I'm doing badly. Like, I'm going to keep going with the plan and my play style and follow my way of playing, because I believe it will get me to where I want to be. So yeah, I don't know, that's a lot of different questions, but we'll just go ad hoc. What are your thoughts in general on this table, your own season, what your targets are based on where you are now? Is it too early to know? Like,
yeah, I think like in terms of my targets, I mean, to be honest, I think I am starting to play at a much better level than I did, like, let's say 2-3 years ago, when I was probably a bit clueless as a manager. And I would say my target is still to try get a top 10k finish, which I've fortunately done for the last 2 seasons. Last season I had an amazing start. The season before, I think I had a relatively routine average season. I've never had a bad start to the season except for this one. But that doesn't really concern me, because I think from what I can say, like, a lot of people who follow, let's say models and solvers, FPL review, that sort of thing, generally speaking, you're not going to get all your points the same way, right? You're going to make good sort of expected point producing decisions, and the moment in time when you get the sort of Mario Kart rocket boost is not the same for every sort of manager. But it's nice to see that, generally speaking, that the trend is ultimately by the end of Gameweek 38, you'll have a great rank. So, for example, last season we had generally a really poor elite start, but then actually they were already, on pace to have the best season ever by Gameweek 24, which is actually before a lot of those blanks and doubles, right? So that's interesting. For this season, I think it is clearly the worst start ever. And I think a lot of us within elite circles have already used some chips. I've used chips already so far. So I already know that I'm a triple captain down versus the rest of the field. And so that feels a little bit bad. But I think, yeah, I'm not, it's not like there's a sort of new approach to FPL that's changed this season that has appeared that I've completely lost sight of. I do think that as things have happened and with the price changes, that a lot of people are just creating very strong teams without much need for, let's say, like, I don't know, models and solvers. Like, when I look at some of the work league teams that I'm competing versus, I have to say they're very impressive. And another thing too is with how well priced some of the sort of premium players have been priced, and I include now Palmer, Saka, Son, Foden in that discussion. Ultimately, I think maybe at the start of the season, with like how we historically played, our general advice to people would be like, don't go for too many premiums within a draft. Don't try to squeeze in these 5.0 picks, 4.0 defenders. But for the most part, unfortunately, a lot of the picks that we think would sit within, let's say, a well-robust draft have not performed, right? Like Pedro Porro has not done any better than Van de Ven. Trent has not done any better than Konate. Some of the sort of 6 million Bruno-type picks up until, let's say, the cost of Foden haven't done anything at all compared to, let's say, the likes of Smith Rowe, who's like a 5.x million asset, or a Semenyo, a 5.x million asset. So to an extent, I think, yeah, like a lot of the analytics-y picks have done really poorly. And then also, generally, I don't think that team structure is as significant as it has been in the past because of the pricing changes. And people have found ways into, I guess, naturally a good team. Like if you own Konate so far, you're sitting and you're laughing because you have 1 goal, 1 assist, and Trent has literally 1 assist. That for me is not going to bear out over time, right? So if you make, I guess, decisions like that, and not that Konate is poor, by the way, I'm just saying, if you, let's say, have players that some people might think are a little bit weaker in terms of like their actual, I guess, efficiency within the game, then yeah, over time, you'd expect the results to average out a little bit more. So some of the more, I guess, mid-tier price picks that a lot of us elite managers have, like the likes of Porro, will probably have a super haul in the future, Trent as well. And I'm laughing because obviously I've taken Trent out of my team, but that's the general point that I would say.
Is he taken out this week?
Yeah. And okay. I think this also applies to things like, City defense, not getting a single clean sheet post Chelsea, despite being a very strong defense, things like that. Like over time, you'll see good results. And I think, and hopefully, us following through certain processes or decision-making patterns will benefit from that somehow. I think it is quite a big mountain to climb, to be honest, just looking at this graph. But yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that you would have looked at a graph like this last season, the scale would have been exactly the same, and you would have probably had the same questions by Gameweek 8, where
I did.
Honestly, an absolute bottom point, right?
It was so terrible. It was so for me, it was the worst. So you said is your only really bad start. So for me, last season was my worst start in 8 years. And the crazy part was I'd just come off the back of a season that was my worst finish in like 8 years. So it's like I just had my worst finish in 8 years. Then I start a new season full of hope. And then I've had my worst start up until game week 10 in 8 years, worse than the season before that was my worst finish. And yet somehow, as you say, by the time I got to game week 38, it ended up being like my 4th best finish ever.
Great.
So it was a really painful season. I really didn't enjoy it with the prices, the way you could just afford anyone and everyone you wanted. Like the same team that was good last year would cost you 120 million game week 1 this year. So, it's not even possible to have that team, whereas everyone could before. Things like Cole Palmer obviously emerged at his price point. But in general, it just felt FPL was a real slog last year. So I do enjoy the changes. I do like the free transfers, rolling them, the using them through chips and carrying them through, the pricing. But then again, I'm now having to adapt to the fact that, okay, now this season is even worse than last season's start. And like, that was the worst start in like nearly a decade. So I don't know if it's the game's just getting harder and like more people are playing like in a way that's better. Like I think in the past, like in my more casual leagues, right? The ones you were talking about, like the work league stuff, they always had like some very rogue picks. But now they only have like one of them. So like my friend will have like a similar 14 out of 15 of what you see on Twitter, but then he has Mainu in there. And then he'll be messaging me like, oh, I need to sell Mainu. Should I buy Kovacic? And he'll be like, oh, I need to sell Kovacic. Should I buy it? And then there'll be some other piece of shit pick. And yet these guys, they're still doing fucking really well.
Yeah.
And so the casuals are much better than they used to be, I would say. That's the FPL app gives you a push notification, reminds you about the deadlines they used to miss, tells you which players to buy, tells you about the double game weeks. Like it's a much more level playing field, I would suggest. So I do think getting the good ranks now, like when you did with your top 400 finish last year, in the most player base we've ever had in such a much more competitive world. And it's such a tough slog of a season. That is commendable. People talk about top 10Ks from 10 years ago when 1 million players played. So I just wanted to just give you a little pat on the back for that one. But yeah.
No, I think so. I mean, obviously I wish I was playing fantasy football like 10 years ago and actually like got good, a lot earlier than I did end up sort of deciding. Because I basically actually decided to create content before I became a good FPL manager is my genuine assessment of it. Like I think I always have a decent brain for the game, but yeah, in terms of like understanding the nuances between like real life football and what that means when you're trying to get FPL points, it's very different. But I think to your point, just looking at just the quality of teams now, it is still going to be very tough for us. I think to make a comeback. I mean, Andy's actually just mentioned in chat that within game weeks 8 to 10, teams get messy. And I think there is a sort of element of, so when let's say managers are faced with a tough decision, like how do they navigate or deal with those decisions? That does probably help elite managers, generally speaking, right? Like the whole concept of are you making good decisions as opposed to something off the whim or you're just trying to chase points from last week because some guy scored. Like Onana is such a good example of that as a pick. And then Rodgers actually finally doing good, but you needed to wait for him to do good is, I think, the perfect example of that. And decisions like that over the course of the season should bear out to meaning that people who are a little bit more into the game and more comfortable around navigating decisions when things get a bit trickier will probably benefit a lot later. We do have less singles and doubles though. So, I mean, less doubles more so and less blanks. But as I said, like even looking at the graph last season, it wasn't necessarily the case that a lot of the elite managers got their rank rises after the doubles. It was actually, I think Wildcard 35, for example, was like stupendously bad as a strategy in terms of outcomes. And that was like the chosen strategy, right? So that probably actually stopped the median rank from being as good as it was. But all in all, it's like, you give someone 38 game weeks of decisions, they can probably average out better decisions and better ranks. So yeah, and I think that's going back to my target. Like my target hasn't changed.
Like it's a tough climb, as you say. I think we have to appreciate it's maybe tougher than prior years, as always. But I just have enough confidence that like people will make mistakes if you just let them make those mistakes. And like Andy says, like some teams will start falling apart relatively soon, and then the hits will start coming back, and then they'll be like weekly. Like I'm already talking to quite engaged managers who are on like -8s this week. So it's already begun. Like the carnage is only going to get worse from here. It just takes a few international break injuries and someone who wildcarded in game week 6 suddenly is taking a -12 in game week 8. Like things can change real fast in FPL. Yeah, so let's keep an eye on that. I have been appreciating Andy's weather reports. I'm glad to see that there's been no random postponements yet, but I know that he's waiting for a really messy random blank to happen or power outage or flood. And I know he's waiting for that moment to say "I told you so." But I do
And then
enjoy
he's
the
gonna
weather.
free hit on two relegation destined teams, or what?
Basically, yeah, basically, it can't be worse than when I went for his beloved Leeds treble up for a bench boost, and then because of the cancelled game or postponed game against Shrewsbury in the cup, they lost their double in game week 16, and I thought, oh, you know what, Leeds are at home, I'll just bench boost anyway. I've got the players, and then they got 2-2-2-2-2, and that was my bench boost that season. So I'm sure Andy remembers which opponent it was. I can't remember who they were playing, but it was like Dallas was in my team, I think. Bamford was in my team. Eiling was in my team. Oh, God, what a season. So talking of players like Trent, who he said is still the best asset in the game, and also obviously Bruno, who you mentioned you've sold. So how many free transfers did you have before the hit, I guess?
Yeah, I only had one free transfer. So
fine. So there's just those two were sold.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've done Bruno to Palmer and Trent to Leaf Davis.
Bruno to Palmer and Trent to Leaf Davis. Okay. I like that. The Leaf Davis with the fixtures coming on, that's kind of spicy pick as well.
Yeah, I mean, mostly because if you look at my team, I can actually play Gabriel Guardiola-Lewis for a long time. And then actually the only bad week I would say is Gabriel's versus Liverpool, where I can just play Dunk versus Wolves at home. So I'm comfortable making that decision. Now, I obviously, it's a bad decision, I will say as well. I can admit to that because of course, Bruno's ban has been overturned. I did it mostly because I think I could have grabbed, let's say, a double Palmer price rise and probably was going to avoid a Bruno price fall, which still seems like it could happen, right? Like both those things. And generally speaking, I would say, even though I think Trent is an amazing asset, I do feel a little bit more comfortable owning Palmer over Trent for the foreseeable. And part of that is because I feel I have strong enough defenders to sort of omit Trent, and then I'm also happy with the minutes of the other players within my team, so that I can allow basically holding Palmer perpetually. Because I would say with Palmer, a lot of people will say you shouldn't be going for him until game week 12, but I would still somewhat disagree where, okay, in the world where Bruno was out, I do think it was justifiable to do it because Palmer's game week 7 is really good. He still plays Newcastle. And then, yes, of course, he has two tough fixtures, but arguably so does Trent, right? Trent still has that Arsenal fixture as well. So when I look at my team and I actually think that, okay, maybe I've gone a little bit too strong on defense in a world where Bruno doesn't exist. So I can play Guardiola, Lewis, Gabriel for the most part, and then Duncan, Leaf Davis can just rotate my sort of odd weeks, right? Maybe if, let's say, there's a Rico Lewis benching, fortunately, if I need an auto sub, if he doesn't come on in 45 minutes, there's some action that I can do there. And that's pretty much my thoughts on why I made that move. Another thing too with Trent is his minutes look great, but people will probably have to just decide going forwards, since I wouldn't say he's necessarily a captainable pick, whether you still want to consider going for the other Liverpool defenders, even if later down the line I don't want Gabriel for whatever reason, which is unlikely, or Guardiola for another reason, and I move those players out, then I can definitely still, I think, revisit other Liverpool defenders that won't break apart my team structure too much. And so I'm probably going to ignore Trent for most of the season now, that I've forced this move for Palmer. But structure, I think both. But like if I had this dropped and I was rolling a free transfer instead and I was sitting on this spot, I would have been happy with this team structure. But because I thought Bruno was out, I thought moving towards a Palmer structure was something I'd be quite happy with.
No, I think on Palmer, I want to ask you. So yeah, I put some of these. Might as well put these comments up because I think that they add to the conversation we're having. So Andy says, I don't appreciate game week 7 free hit slander. When managers free hitted in a terrible blank game week 29 to hold City assets who had Liverpool and Arsenal either side of the blank and wildcarded late to make it worthless. So I said, to be fair, you did say that the game week 35 wildcard didn't really end up going anywhere. So I think, that free hit 29, I remember it vividly. I believe it was the lowest scoring average of a game week since like the last 10 years in FPL, and that was the week where I used my free hit. So I know, Andy, trust me,
but
it's paid.
I still think that the main difference in the outcome though is still how good free hit 34 came off, right? So arguably if you didn't go for free hit 34, like every other decision was just bad.
Yeah, so I think free hit 34 you were happy with, right?
Yeah, I mean,
but those that did it,
yeah,
what
exactly.
did you go for?
And it's also because all the free hit 34 picks did amazing, like that were specific to the free hit. Like if you went and looked at, let's say, a lot of the quote unquote strong teams at the time, like White scoring like 20 points more than any Arsenal defender, Odegaard, Havertz doing well, as opposed to Saka. Liverpool players all blanking, which I think a lot of people owned Liverpool players during that decent run of games. Branthwaite, for example, scoring and getting a clean sheet versus Liverpool. That's also things like that would, I would say, not happen so often in such a favorable way for a free hit. And that just happened, right? The same way, for example, like you can argue, I don't know, like some of the blank game week picks, I suppose could have done well, but Reguilon instead decided to get a red. Like things like that can happen, and they're pretty brutal swings. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to comment on wildcard 35. I didn't go on it, and I didn't do 3 at 34 either. So I did 3 at 29, and I did an early wildcard, if you remember, and it went awful because I had 4 injured players in 2 game weeks.
Despite that, you finished in the top.
Yeah, and I took a minus 16 as well on game week 35. Yeah. So
that close to the end, you were bold.
I took a minus 16, and I was really 8K at the time, and I think I just got absurdly lucky after the minus 16 because I had things like the Gusto assist plus clean sheet plus triple bonus, and then Eze at the end of the season, Isak at the end of the season, couple other things.
Were you there for the Isaac Wilson?
I was at meets with Jack, and we basically had the same team, and I every single player on my team just hauled, and I think I even had a Vicario clean sheet and Porro.
So rare Vicario. Yeah. I think that might be one of like the last
But now they actually look like a good team, right? Spurs. So
yeah, I think I'm liking the look of players like obviously Solanke, who you've got in your team. For the podcast viewers, I will read out your team. So you have Haaland, Solanke, Calvert-Lewin front line. Obviously, Bruno's been replaced by Palmer, so there with Saka, Mbeumo, Rodgers, and Dibbling as your enabler. Trent's been replaced with Leif Davis in a rotation for that third slot. You've got Gabriel, Lewis, Leif Davis, Dunk, and Guardiol, and then the Flecken and the backup keeper option, right? So yeah, I think I think all things considered, not knowing that the appeal would happen or go ahead, for Bruno, you can't change that. You've obviously gone for prices as well. As you say, this season I've tried to be more aggressive with price changes than I have in prior years. But it's interesting because you're the first more analytical manager that I found that is willing to just get rid of Bruno. Like as you know, I've debated with Simon and Brad last week, and it just feels like Bruno's one of those players where because he's always looked so ready to get points, it's like, how can you sell him, right? So almost like you had your one opportunity to get out, and I wonder if you would have still done it if he wasn't banned, like if you had known or if you had that benefit.
No, I definitely would be rolling this week, 100%.
You'd be rolling, okay.
I think one thing I can say is that from analytics managers, there were actually a select few who I will say that I didn't love Luis Diaz on a wild card, like in place of Bruno, but there were some people who are already on my draft structure. So like going Palmer, for example, over Bruno, and then actually not having Trent, but then maybe instead some of them actually went for like Greaves or Vandenberg, or even another 4.5. And I think I know quite a few managers who did that, or some people who actually went even more interesting, which I think was like Saka, Salah, Haaland on that one.
Wow.
So there was some variety, absolutely. The reason why I went for Bruno is because I just didn't see any reason for me to think that Bruno was. I still don't think he's a bad pick, and I can happily disagree with anyone who's gonna fight that opinion. But yes, they're an awful team, but it doesn't mean that he's an awful FPL asset. Is generally how I would sort of respond to that most times, and that happens from time to time. Like I think even when you look at someone like Trent, he's clearly underperformed in terms of expectations compared to some of the peers that we talked about, right? Like for example, Kanate, Allison, etc. Like the fact that he only has 1 assist is not great value.
It's shocking,
spending that much on Trent, and that happens from time to time. Like players will not always deliver when you want them to, and that's just the beauty of FPL.
Just a quick one as well. We have the Liverpool lineups for tonight's Champions League game. So we have Mohamed Salah with Darwin Núñez through the middle and Luis Diaz. That is not something I want to see.
It's a win for Bruno owners. Let's go.
That is not what I want to see. I was going to roll this week. I have 2 free transfers. I'm obviously fresh off a wild card. But if I have some doubts that Diaz starts this weekend, there is a world in which I would move him on, and I just thought that's a good chance and segue to talk about the Spurs players. So we mentioned Solanke was in your team, said they're doing better as a team this year. Their attack seems to be on the up again after a kind of rough start to the season for them, but ultimately now we've got Johnson's been scoring 4 and 4, I believe. Like Solanke's in, he's obviously back from the injury. Son was out, which was noticeable, but yeah. What are your thoughts on like Brennan Johnson as an asset? So for someone like me with Luis Diaz, if I was like confident he wasn't going to start the game, is it just a kind of roll anyway kind of situation in your eyes and get to free transfers, or is there an upside there to chase and be a bit more aggressive and just like use one of the 2 free transfers or someone like a Brennan Johnson?
Needs to check when Liverpool actually play. Yeah, I mean, so Liverpool play. They're the first Sunday, game, right? So you'll probably get leaks, right? So I think
no way. They're the 12:30. Despite playing on a Wednesday, I swear the Klopp curse hasn't gone, man. These guys get screwed over every time.
Which also probably means that there's like in most universes, Gakpo should start. I would say basically wait for Liverpool league. Probably plan to sell Luis Diaz anyways, and because I'm the type of manager where I'm not someone who looks at, let's say, Luis Diaz and thinks, okay, this is a brilliant player. In 10-15 minutes, he can do something. I'd rather just get 75, 90. And that's fine. I think that's totally fine. A lot of people
only wanted him for 2 weeks or so. And like, if one of them is not going to start him, then I might as well, as you say, get ahead of it and move him on. Because I don't think he's the kind of guy where I'm like, oh, he might get a brace off the bench. It's not what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like, I think even like, let's say a couple Liverpool predictors were thinking that Luis Diaz would start the previous game, which he did, and then actually get benched in the Champions League game and then actually start again this weekend. But maybe because he had a slightly poor game, I suppose, on the weekend. I don't know if it's the case that Gakpo is destined for, and to be fair, he does deserve a Premier League start, even if Jota's not fit, right? So
I guess it all depends, right? So maybe if he played like 90 tonight, then I start to get a bit twitchy. If he gets subbed early, then I'm like, okay, there's still hope. There's still hope all the way through till Saturday morning deadline.
Yeah, but yeah, I think I would just go towards the deadline, planning to sell him, to be honest. And look, Brighton away isn't necessarily a great game. I know that John Paul Van Heck is out, and that's actually really significant because why they even bother trying to pass out the back like that without him is questionable. But it's not going to be as simple, and I think people also should just be a bit fair. Like, home and away is very significant when it comes to like expectations, and so once you sort of splice that in, I don't think a Spurs pick is immediately good. Like, for example, if I knew Luis Diaz was starting, there's no way I'd sell him. If he was benched, though, then yeah, I'd absolutely consider a Liverpool pick moving out and definitely go for, let's say, a Johnson or a Kulusevski. Johnson does feel nice because with Odobert out for a while and his price being so low, I can see a lot of managers just generally being enamored with him. I mean, he was definitely a pick, even that was quite popular last season, like on Wildcard 35.
I remember
part of it is because exactly like I think even managers like Baker were sort of doing like analysis on him and sort of calling him mini Salah and all this stuff. But his underlying stats are really good. And generally speaking, like this 5-game run of Spurs between like 8 and I think 11 is just like incredible. So why not? Why not jump on early?
So maybe, like, yeah, I guess it's not the ideal game, like, especially if you know Diaz is starting. But if not, then it's an option. The alternative for me would be I've got like a Rodgers, Calvert-Lewin benching decision to make. And I guess I could still roll and like start Rodgers and Calvert-Lewin. True. So there is that option. So it just depends if there is an asset I really want enough. But I think the thing that frustrates me most, right, is I was kind of between 2 drafts on Wildcard 6, and one of them would have been Palmer instead of Diaz, but I would have had to sacrifice like the Calvert-Lewin slot to a 4.5 million striker and downgrade Trent to like a Guardiola. But now I look at that and I'm like, well, actually, in fucking hindsight, like Guardiola, Palmer, and a dead third striker so that Rodgers wasn't on my bench. All 3 of those sound like they've been better than the 3 players I had. So it just feels really frustrating when you're there looking at like a 20-30 point swing, right?
Yeah.
In like an immediate
I mean, look at my team. Like, so
it's just so painful. But it sounds like the reason I bring it up is that you've gone and like fixed it, but it's almost like the Bruno Red gave you the opportunity to just go and do it. Whereas I'm here now and I'm like, shit. So do I just ditch these assholes like Luis Diaz and like, do I just try to get to Palmer, or do I back the reason I didn't buy Palmer, which is I thought actually after the first few games there was a few tough ones and I could wait.
Yeah,
you've gone on the opposite opinion. You believe fuck the fixtures and Palmer's the guy, and obviously he's not registered for Europe, which is a huge bonus.
Yeah, I think part of it too is like Trent also has somewhat poor fixtures over that run. So then when I think about, am I comfortable just playing Guardiola Lewis perpetually and then having a sub potentially? Is that better in terms of team structure in a Bruno-less world? So that's kind of why I was comfortable with Palmer. And going back to the point, like if let's say Lewis and Guardiola are fully able to play, I mean, I think Lewis is more likely to be benched over the next few, but just because he's played much more minutes. But I can see with how important they are to the City team that they get most of the minutes that I want, and that I don't lose too much out from Trent, even though Trent is still amazing. And then when it comes to game week 10, I would have hoped that by then I would have rolled maybe 3 transfers, and then I can make good decisions there, because I think there's like a game week 10 is like a nice week to sort of revisit some of the Spurs picks. Arguably, what I could do next week is if I really feel like it, like I could do Saka to Son next week, right? If Son's alive and his hamstring issues and severe, then that's a move that I could go for, because I would say Arsenal's yes, okay.
There's definitely a few tough
on
fixtures
paper is
coming.
okay, but yeah, those are tough games for Arsenal, and that's why I was thinking if I go for Palmer, then that's basically me saying I can pick Palmer over Saka, who I think I would be comfortable owning over that run of 3 games, which are some poor for both Chelsea and Arsenal. But then I can actually free myself up to just going for Son instead. And then I don't feel bad about my team structure at all during that period, because ultimately I'd keep Palmer the whole time. And then Saka and Son are the players that I think are a bit more flexible.
Do that moving in and out of them based on the fixtures. Yeah, I like that. I do also have, I'm just having a look here. I have Semenyo. Obviously, I'll give him the Leicester game, but I'm pretty much going to be benching him for all the Arsenal, Aston Villa, City games. So part of that's like, okay, like, so maybe I need to not just think about Diaz in isolation. I might need to almost think about like, what do I do? Like, do I free up money from one of them, or do I split the money and go to a different price point for both of them? It's like, there's the whole Trent question. I think once I get to that Chelsea Arsenal games, I'd be considering using that as an option to free up. So it's almost like if I roll, then I have 3 transfers, and then I can be like, okay, let's make whole sweep changes, like just like another mini wild card, like the good old days, except it won't be on a -4. So I don't know whether to be aggressive like you and going now, because I don't have like the red card thing. So for me, I don't have the same urge. Like I'm sitting here on a benching dilemma, and I'm like regretting even owning Calvert-Lewin, because all the fixtures after Newcastle look great. So it's like, how can I have bought this guy and not start him, and he's on penalties? But then Rodgers already done me once, and Man United are going to be, as Andy says, leggy on their away trip tomorrow.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, to be fair, even within my own team, like next week on Game Week 8, I'll probably be having to decide between Rodgers and Dibbling. Like if Dibbling still has good minutes by then I've actually got Dibbling versus Leicester, and then I could actually bench Rodgers versus Fulham away. Like things like that is probably, I think that's why I switched off of Semenyo on my draft almost in the last moment, because I was a bit more comfortable. I think, or I had enough confidence that Rodgers was someone that I could play a lot. It's nice that Semenyo, I mean, it's nice to own Semenyo. I think he's just generally going to be a great pick this season. But we are somewhat, I think we've been hurt a little bit by some of the benchings, I guess, or lack of auto sub jam. Like I definitely haven't felt any good green of rub from, like, let's say João Pedro being out and things like that. I've only really suffered. But there's been a lot of bench jam this season, and eventually, like, I'm sure we'll get our rotations and things like that right, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think so. Let's is a good segue into my Diaz debate. Kind of, it's a good time to look at the projected goals and clean sheet odds from RobTFPL. It takes obviously the betting markets. Just a few call outs as well for the podcast viewers. So where are we? We're in the 53-minute timestamp. If you want to come and see this graphic, guys. I'm just going to timestamp that. So yeah, so the main call outs are they currently have Arsenal at 3.05 expected goals. They have Man City at 2.65. They have Chelsea 2.25, Liverpool 2.2, Tottenham 1.95, and then it kind of drops a bit from there. Clean sheet wise, they have Arsenal at 55% again. That's what they had last week. So it's not always accurate. You know, you can get a worldie and a deflection, and suddenly you've lost -1. 46% clean sheet for Man City. So you there with your double could be interesting, depending on Lewis X minutes thoughts. And then we have 36% for Chelsea, 34% for Liverpool, 31% for West Ham, and 29% for Flecken, which we know that I just already know how that's going to end. So yeah, those are kind of the key best clean sheet fixtures for the week according to the betting markets, and as well as the goal scorers for the number of goals. So I have two questions here. One is like, obviously Spurs are still here at 1.95 despite the slightly tricky game, and I think we've got to account for Van Heck's injury. He's out for a while. If they do try to play out for the back, if they do play a high line in the center of the pitch with their back line, like, this could be an amazing game for a Spurs asset. So for me, that's one I'm definitely going to have to think about as a late move if it comes to it. So separate to that, is there any other fixtures you see here? Like Jared Bowen, you mentioned West Ham are on 1.85, home to Ipswich. Any other time apart from what we've seen from West Ham the last 6 weeks, and Bowen would be being talked about tons. He'd be on thumbnails this week, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. I guess there's nothing that really strikes out to me too much, but I think maybe like between Newcastle and Brentford, there's some interesting picks there. Like if we get some news on Isaac that's worse, like Gordon becomes actually quite interesting in the interim. I think in Brentford you have like Carvalho, who seems quite interesting as well. So there's quite a lot of budget mid picks on offer this game week that actually have good games. And that's pretty much all I would mention. It probably like Aston Villa, Man United, Brighton, and Tottenham. Those are the games where you're looking for like classic both teams to score and a lot of action, hopefully from your players, as long as they're involved in those games and they're attackers, not defenders. But it seems like a relatively standard game week for myself with the Man City defense. I just hope Rico Lewis starts.
Yeah, I think for me as well, obviously Rico Lewis, I need him to start. Otherwise, I've got Mikalenko, which it's not great. So that's an understatement, I guess. And then this whole Aston Villa thing, 1.75 goals at home, Everton 1.38. I look at that. I'm not sure. I feel like every draft I've seen so far right now has like DCL starting because of the penalties ahead of Rodgers. And I kind of put a screenshot with Rodgers starting, and then I was a bit like, oh, why am I the only one? Like, I'm scrolling through and everyone else has Rodgers first bench. So I don't know if that is me reacting in hindsight. I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's just people are waiting the penalties for Calvert-Lewin more than the fact that like Aston Villa are just a significantly better team than Everton. Even here are the predicted goals. Like, I guess they're predicted 2 rather than 1, you could say. Like, they're predicted to win 2-1 against Man United, maybe 2-2. Whereas Everton Newcastle is a Newcastle 2-1 victory kind of prediction based on the odds.
Yeah, I think it's one of those cases where you probably think, okay, even though Everton have less predicted goals, DCL has higher goal share. So maybe when we look at the implied sort of goal scoring odds, I mean, DCL will be probably quite high up this week. I do think that this is, for example, like a week where you can definitely consider benching Wood, though, for example. So some people who've went there, like this is a good week to do that. I do think Rodgers and DCL is super close as a decision, and you might want to just make that decision. Like if I think 2 players are actually very close, I tend to just lean into playing the player who's less owned, but that's just my own risk preference.
That's fair. I think that's what I did last week, right? I went against like the 30% effective ownership of Rodgers. I'm just looking at the games tonight. Obviously, we talked about the Liverpool lineup briefly earlier, but I'm also just checking one more thing, which is I forgot about this. Just a real quick look about one of the matches. Let's see.
I guess there's always the aspect too that things can change up until the deadline, right? Like Aston Villa being involved in European games, like that can have a negative impact. But
that's what I'm checking. So it is a very it's a strong. It's obviously against luckily they're home, so they're not traveling. This tough game. So we've got Ollie Watkins, Rodgers, Ramsey, and Philogene, and then we've got Onana, Tielemans, Digne, Torres, Carlos, Konsa.
It's good to see Rodgers alive.
So he's obviously back. Whatever the injury was is not too serious, the knock. And I guess we see how many minutes he plays. I actually have him in UCL fantasy, so
same. I do.
Hopefully he does something. I thought if I owned him in that game, like maybe I'll finally get.
Maybe he'll actually score in one of them.
Yeah, well, and I end up benching him for his goal.
I mean, I went with him too because I think he is a bit of a no-brainer in terms of like how important he is to that team, and ultimately I still have quite a bit of confidence in Aston Villa, generally speaking. And he's like 5 million, right, in UCL. So like I think people were laughing at him because like 3 game weeks in and he didn't do a thing, and that's enough to like conclude that a player is not going to do well for the foreseeable. Like, well, not really unless you're Bruno. So yeah.
Let's captaincy, and then we'll take the Q&A from the chat. We have a couple of questions from Discord, and then we'll get out of here. People can get dinner and get ready for the Champions League. Big games, as we mentioned. So Trophy FPL asked about captaincy this week. So I've been on Haaland bus cap this whole time. But, I did actually see the captaincy poll in the analytics, and it was Discord, and it's very split. There is actually almost an even amount of Saka. And I do think that I've always been quite surprised how all the stick analytics managers get for like just copying models, which I don't believe that's how they play. It's actually them who take the biggest swings against captaincy EO, because they will always go for the one who they believe will get the most points. So in a situation here where it's 3.05 for Arsenal, goals-wise, I see a lot of them are willing to go for a Saka over Haaland, and yet in the wider Twitter majority, you'll see it will actually be Haaland definitively ranking in all the polls, like 80-90% of votes. So that's quite a quirk, I think, that people give this like stick to beat analytics managers with, and yet I find they take some of the most refreshing captaincies out there because they don't worry about the ownership.
Yeah, or I think they're quite conscious that they're sort of betting against the field, but they feel like they're amplified by, like a third-party source of data that says that it's actually a genuinely good risk to take, as opposed to like, oh, I'm just going to go for this 1% owned player who nobody owns. Like, that's risk, but it's also just potentially bad play sometimes, right? Yeah. So yeah. I think, there's a nice balance too. For this week, what's interesting, I think, is that I'm not sure if RobT's actually posted it, but I reckon that on market data, Saka might be the better captaincy. Not in terms of like goal scoring odds, but then actually when you sort of recalculate the midfield versus forward element, the clean sheet element, things like that, it could actually be I guess
even the creativity, right? The assist side of things as well. Like Haaland scored a ton of goals, but he's yet to register an assist this season, as far as I know.
I mean, that's true actually. Like we tend the nice thing that Haaland can do is he can get rebound assists, but models do account for that anyways. But going back to like the whole market element of things, the one thing was Saka, as you said, is assists. And so when we look at, for example, RobT's like goal projections, like that's the goal projections, but it doesn't say anything about how much better Saka and Salah on any individual week are much better than Haaland in the creative element of the game. And that even goes towards Palmer as well, to be fair, who actually has a pretty decent game, but nowhere near as good as Arsenal's. So yeah.
Cool. Let's go to the Q&A. I think we can probably do like 5-minute quick fire. We'll just go through a few messages. Before that, I'm just going to give a quick shout out to all the key holders, or previously as they were known, haulers, since we rebranded to Locked In FPL. We had to change our member name. So our master key holders, Greenback Golf, Gary Hallwood. I got gifted a membership last week, so I do owe gifting a membership back to someone because it shouldn't have ended up with me. That's terrible. And Roberto Mancun Song. So thank you to you guys, the key holders: Podner, Kevin Rose, Blonde, FPL Teacher, Tom Gorsuch, Lindsay, Dom, Claire, Tusk, Catherine, Harry Not Kane, Benjamin Lockwood, FPL Discomfort, Grady, Jasper and Singh, BW Splitter, and the FPL Juice Show. Last but not least, our Patreons: Elron, FPL California, Mike Burke, Draft Alchemy, and Dr. Green Farm. Thank you all for your support. We're 1 hour in. If you've enjoyed this so far, and obviously a huge thank you to Fran for coming as well, please do hit that like button. First time I'm plugging for that in the whole show. Do subscribe if you're new around here as well. I'll be looking to do this every Wednesday with lots of different guests and just casual fireside chats, getting to know different FPL managers. Not always content creators, but just people I've met at FPL meets or talked to online, and just have casual, unscripted conversations, right? And just show up and no prep and just have some market odds open and ask you about FPL. So it's quite candid, and sometimes you learn a lot about each other. So it's been quite fun, Fran. But we're going to go into the quick fire Q&A now that we thanked everyone and plugged all the likes and asked for the subscribers. So let's go with the Discord questions first, actually. So I'll timestamp this 1 hour, 3 minutes. So there's only 2 questions here, and then we've got about 15 of them from the live chat on YouTube that I will very quickly get to as well. So in Discord, from BW Splitter, they have a bench dilemma: Rodgers, Semenyo, and McNeil. So I'll start with that question just there. Maybe it's a good time to put the odds back on the screen as well. So we've got Rodgers, Semenyo, and McNeil.
I'd play Rodgers and Semenyo, I think quite comfortably. Because I think you can apply even the logic. So it's not even now like center forward versus midfield. It's just midfielders to midfielders, really, or even wingers, arguably. But much better for Bournemouth than Aston Villa. Take your bets with those 2 players.
Yeah, I agree. And then he kind of goes on to say, since I'll bench Semenyo the following week versus Arsenal, so not this week, but the following week when they play Arsenal, should I consider downgrading him this week to begin the surgery to get Palmer in eventually? I planned on rolling after my Game Week 6 wildcard, but I have a few moves to make if I want any big upgrades. That's obviously if you were going to bench Semenyo this week. I wouldn't. I would agree with Fran, and I would bench McNeil this week personally. And then maybe, then you have more free transfers to do that surgery for Palmer anyway. I just think you might decide actually like who you want to buy for Semenyo might be different with another week of info. So I wouldn't make that move now if it's just because you want to free up money and put bench fodder in. I think you're only wanting to do it because you're scared about benching points. So instead of benching one of the three you asked and then being like, damn, I benched the one with points, you're trying to use a transfer to downgrade a bench slot essentially to not have a decision on who to bench. So I wouldn't make that transfer for that reason. I don't think it's a good enough reason to make a transfer. So Claire FPL, I had to use my one free transfer on Pedro out. I wonder if it's worth a hit this week on Smith Rowe out for Brennan Johnson. Fixtures getting trickier for Fulham. I'm benching Robinson this week.
I'd be open to that move if you were forced to play Smith Rowe. Because if you're forced to play Smith Rowe, this is his absolute worst fixture possible. So I would take this opportunity to take the hit, because a lot of things with hits, and I'd say like playing with analytics, is that you take the hit knowing that over the run of games that someone's going to outperform, right? So I think Brennan Johnson will outperform Smith Rowe by more than 4 points over the next few game weeks because of how good, as I said, those next 5 Spurs fixtures are. So if you're really unable to play someone better than Smith Rowe this week, I would generally be open to the idea.
Cool. All right, let's go to the YouTube live one. So I'm time-stamping this 1 hour, 6 minute 30. So anyone who didn't watch the whole show, they had questions earlier in the episode when they were here. We will put this in the description so you can easily come back. So first one was from Speed Naldo. Opinions on what to do with Ben White.
I think you kind of have to sell him.
Yeah, I hate to admit it, but I just feel with Timber, Calafiori, and Ben White, there's just too much uncertainty going forwards. You know, Calafiori looks fantastic. Like, I know he's a bit chaotic and has a bit of scary moments. And gives the ball away a handful of times a game, but hopefully that chaos can also be useful going forwards. He's the one I'm looking at as an exciting punt in the Arsenal defensive line in a few weeks' time. Timber just looks so good. That first half against Bayern last night, I was in awe. Not Bayern, sorry, I guess thinking about the game. Yeah, PSG. But yeah, that first half, I was in awe. He got subbed because he played a lot of minutes recently. He felt something in his muscle. But Ben White wasn't fit most of last year, and he doesn't tell the coaches when he's injured, and he just plays through it. And it was all there against Man City. He came on injured. He didn't start because he was injured. He came on, played a whole half injured. And as I said, he'll run through a brick wall for us. So I almost feel like with the new depth, maybe he's actually never gotten over the injury from the end of last season. And it's like he's finally going to get some of that much needed rest. So I don't think it's the end of Ben White, but just for the foreseeable for now, unless you get news and you see photos of him in training ready to go, if he's still like a late test going into this weekend, I would heavily consider moving on. But yeah, keep an eye out for the news. But yeah, I think there's just too much competition there for me for now. So there's Martin. Hi guys, first time here. This is actually just like he's having an amazing season so far. So well done, mate. Kudos to you. 20k. Took a -4 from Mbeumo and Gabriel, and Captain Palmer went to 750 live rank at halftime. Currently 5k. So yeah, mate, that is incredible. Well done.
That's insane. Congrats.
That is insane. What else? So okay, some of these. Let's see. Okay, so this one is from Braddon. They ask, who should we bench? Wood, Rogers, Semenyo, thanks.
Yeah, I'd bench
Wood. You said Wood, right? Yeah, I think based on the odds as well. Yeah, I think I'd have to go Wood with Forest at 1.03. I really like Rogers this week. I really like Semenyo. I think I have to agree. Ode Esfacer. Hopefully I've not said something naughty in another language. Hopefully it's just your name and not something else. But do you guys think Saka and Welbeck to Havertz and Mbeumo is worth it? Oh, I wouldn't do it, but
no,
as free transfers, if it's not a hit, I like that pairing more going forward long term. But I have a lot of faith in Saka's ability to generate points from the assist side of things as well. Like he's just, those deliveries on those corners are disgusting. Like, eventually one of these like, they're just scoring from a set piece every game at this stage, and last season it was said to be unsustainable, and it just still keeps going. It's still happening. And separate to that, I think he's the main man, he's the talisman. I love Havertz, but he is doing a lot right now. He's playing a lot of minutes, playing multiple roles, doing a lot of hard dirty work, which Saka's doing too, like defensively on the wing. But generally there's a few things that might still change. So like I would keep an eye, like I wouldn't want to make this move yet. I'd want to see the impact of Marino. Does Marino come in straight away? Does Rice move to 6? Does Partey get dropped? Does Partey keep playing, but then Marino sometimes rotates in? What impact does this mean? Havertz goes back up top. Odegaard could be back after this international break. So like there's just so much to happen. I wouldn't want to be doing this before an international break. I'd want to get a few more weeks of data on Arsenal and then decide, should I make a switch?
Yeah, it's one of those weird things where I think Mbeumo is so good that you want to have him, but you don't want to like take like any of the other players here. I don't think necessarily need transfers, but you want to find a way to get Mbeumo in your team. And I'd probably like look for alternative ways towards doing that, because this is a really good week for Mbeumo as well. It's Wolves at home, so
it is. Yeah,
I guess for free transfers, you could do it, but it's definitely probably because you have Haaland captain. And you don't need Saka to compete on that sense. And then I think Havertz and Mbeumo might be better. But I would probably actually prefer, if you really want to go Mbeumo this week, to go Mbeumo Solanke. And I feel like that's a bit stronger in the medium term. And then actually, okay, you lose a little bit of value because it's not quite Havertz versus Southampton, but you get a good run of fixtures for both Mbeumo and Solanke. And then you can use that money to hopefully upgrade another position, is one way I would approach it. Or you roll. Because this is a really good Saka game week. And honestly, this is still well back at home and on pens. So
yeah, true.
Does he need to be transferred out this week? In a home fixture, I would say not necessarily, but you can definitely do it next week because game week 8 isn't a good fixture for Brighton. So, yeah.
Okay, so Braden asks, my team has Haaland, but if I want to climb the rankings, I'll captain Palmer. Do you think it's a risk? I'm honestly all for captaining different players. I have nothing against that. I think we see Chelsea are here kind of close to Man City on the bookies odds, not too far away. It just really depends. Like, it's almost like, are you doing it because you think Palmer will get more points? Is it because he's a midfielder? Or is it just because you are trying to climb aggressively? Like, when we were looking at the graphic earlier, we were saying that ultimately, like, you will, if you just keep making good decisions, steady decisions, like probably end the season in a very good place in the top 100K, even if you're in the millions now. So I wouldn't feel like 6 weeks in, 7 weeks in, you need to be forcing decisions. If you believe Palmer will get the most points this week, then yeah, I'm all for that. But I wouldn't be thinking about it as like a risk. I think you're saying you want to climb the rankings. I just don't think that's like, I don't even look at the rankings till like the last 8 weeks and like mini leagues till the last 4 weeks, because I don't want to make decisions based on where I am now. Like, I'm not concerned. It's like that idea that if I just keep following my process, do my play style, and don't do things that I'll regret later, at some point it will work out for me, no matter how many times it goes wrong. Maybe I'm stubborn and I believe in my play style, but if you want to be more aggressive, I'd say go for it. But for me, it's just, I don't have him. Obviously, Fran has him. I doubt he's captaining him, though.
Yeah, I think I'd be more in my personal position, I'd be more interested in captaining Saka, as I mentioned previously. But look, it's still a very good game for Palmer. I would still think that he's probably a worse captaincy than the two that I've mentioned. But I guess it is the best way of like taking some risk on and saying that it's calculated, because it's not far off, I would say, Haaland and Saka, and it is good enough. But do you need to do it? I would say probably not. And I'd lean towards making those riskier calls later down the season. But if you're comfortable with doing and continuing to take on risk as you have, and I think you've done really well so far, then yeah, why not?
Cool. Let's quick fire this, because I've kept you 15 minutes longer than I said. I did say it never lasts an hour. It's always so.
Oh, it's all right. Don't worry about it.
So nice chatting to you at the beginning. We spent like half an hour just chatting about the philosophies of football and life. So Lucian says, we need to talk about Rodri. Will Pep and Haaland solve the Rodri equation, or will we be able to avoid capping Haaland for away games? That's fascinating one. Obviously, the Newcastle game is fresh in the memory, 1-1. You can see that didn't quite go to plan. Do you think that that might be something we see a repeat of in some of these away games for City? Like Rodri's obviously a hugely pivotal player for them, Ballon d'Or level kind of player, as we would say. Yeah, what are your thoughts there? Because I think this is maybe going back to your more tactical days, less FPL focused, apart from the capping Haaland part. But do you think like that Pep and that squad are just too good and they'll just find another solution? They'll find another way forward? Or is Rodri like that good that he is truly something to consider in our decision making in FPL?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rodri's significant, but then more often than not, you're probably going to captain Haaland on an away fixture if it's significantly better than, let's say, what Saka, Salah, Palmer have, at their disposal. So I'll never think about it like, how do I interpret Haaland in an away game? I think I would always look at it from a fixture perspective. And I think one thing too, okay, Haaland might struggle to get, let's say onto the ball, get many touches. But the thing with FPL that we know is just at the end of the day, like weak defenses falter. They will give away chances. Like you might play in a low block, but and it might benefit a person from a tactical point of view. But like in terms of FPL, like it's a results-based game, right? So for example, let's say if Haaland gets a penalty and he does nothing in the game, he's still going to probably score that penalty and get points there. So I think sometimes it's worth probably taking a step back a little bit. I'd probably be a little bit less confident in Haaland, generally speaking, especially with De Bruyne out sometimes. I don't love Haaland as much, but he's still him. And it's just a case of whether the alternative captaincy is better. So I would always just look at it on that sort of balance, as opposed to like, I'm going to outright ignore a Rodri-less Haaland.
I think that's the better way.
They've played, like, I think even in the games at the start of the season where they played like Kovacic, Lewis, those are better
without
than
him most of the season, right? So it's not like
exactly
anything's changed.
Like a lot of those opening games of the season, they were brilliant. And in fact, it's not even just a Haaland thing, but it was just like last season. I think a lot of people sort of singled out those Rodri games and sort of mentioned that, they're really struggling without him, which is fair on the offensive end, or even defensively, right? Because they were conceding in all those games too. But their XG was also really poor in those games. Whereas this season, we started out with effectively, I think, Lewis doing really well in the pockets. And there's already some solutions there, plus Gundo's back, which is something that wasn't there last season. So I think they'll be fine. I think Haaland will be fine too.
I think the memories are short. Like, it was just a few weeks ago we were saying that Haaland looked a different level to last year and how incredible he was. Yeah. And that was without Rodri. So, I wouldn't worry too much. Trophy FPL, does Fran regret selling Bruno now that he is going to play? I know you said you wouldn't have made the move if it
I'm not happy that the appeal was overturned, but I think it was a fair decision to make. I just thought that they'd probably, in some weird way, I guess, protect terrible refereeing calls, but they didn't, which is good. I don't really do regrets in FPL, so I think now that I've made the decision, I'll just have to live with the decision, so it's fine with me.
Fair enough.
It's a bad decision, though.
Yeah, no. So this one from David, much more chill on your own pod, mate. Subscribed. What a turnaround from hating you on above average. So I'd love to know which episode it was. Yeah. I'd love to know if it was like the preseason episode with just Adam, where we previewed Arsenal, I think last season or the season before even maybe, or whether it was the one where me and Clayton came on before a North London derby and it wasn't about FPL. It was we did like an Arsenal Spurs preview and it was like Adam and Baker versus me and Clayton. Either way, if it was the Arsenal Spurs one or anything Arsenal related for an hour, I can imagine why you would have hated me. So it's all good. I'm insufferable when I talk about Arsenal. I can't stop. So I appreciate you giving us another chance, David. Your question is Captain Haaland or Palmer? I don't have both, so I'm going Haaland. There's a part of me that's tempted by Saka, knowing I'll be at the stadium with that bias and thinking this will be fun to watch.
That'll be fun.
So that is the fun. I know you like some of those little grass type moments where it's like, I'm going to be at the game. Maybe I should captain Son and then bang, hat trick. It's like you never forget that memory, right? But
I just love celebrating points. So I think you should
being there for them, right? Like live as well. It's so good. But so I think just in terms of this, I do feel that Palmer is fine, but it's what we said to the last guy, right? Who was asking about, should I captain Palmer as a risk to climb rank? I wouldn't do it just to climb rank. Like I would do it if you truly think that this fixture this week, David, like Chelsea home against Forest, is better. I personally feel the bookies odds of 2.25 goals for Chelsea, which is like the third best of the week, is a bit high considering how Forest have been playing defensively this year. I get they're away from home, but I think maybe I'm over-indexing how good Forest are defensively, and maybe the bookies' odds are under-indexing. I don't know. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's going to be as cut and dry. I could see a draw here, famous last words. So for me, it has to be Haaland, because I do not, as much as I'd love to see a draw with Fulham and the Arsenal B team boys to go out and do it for us, Colm, all of Nelson, Smith Rowe, Wobie, just go and get those daggers in. I just don't. I'm sorry, Colm. I don't see how you're going to do it. So I have to back a 3-0 or 2-0 there for City. Bauer Sim. Who should I bench between Rodgers and Souček? For me, it's Souček, like in a heartbeat. I understand it's a better fixture for West Ham, but I just personally, I can't be even comparing the two of those players based on like their positions for their teams, the strength of the respective teams, and just like Man United, like Ten Hag is fighting for his life, right? So I guess it depends if you believe like, is he going to pick players that will fight for him and keep his job, and therefore United will be tougher to beat? Or is it like, this is it, like this is the end times, like this is the one where he loses 7-0 against Villa and gets sacked the next morning? Like, you know, like it could, you know, like, is he going to hold on for dear life, or is he going to get sacked too? So it's you got to make that call how you feel about the game. I just feel Aston Villa are going to be out for blood. Like, I'm truly scared for Man United and Ten Hag's coaching abilities.
Sure.
But I don't know if you disagree. Is there something you like about Souček in this fixture? Obviously, it's Ipswich. It's at home. West Ham have to turn around at some point.
Yeah, I mean, like both, I guess. And West Ham are also against the corner, I suppose, and they've been awful. But this is like their first final good fixture. So I actually wouldn't mind benching Rodgers, especially if he plays a lot of Champions League minutes tonight. Then maybe I could justify it that way. I think it's pretty close actually this week, just because it's such a good West Ham fixture. On most game weeks, I would actually definitely go Rodgers, but this week I don't mind going Souček.
Fair enough. And then we'll keep going. Just a few last ones. This one is a fun question. Which of the refereeing mistakes this season have you enjoyed the most so far, especially if it screws others in FPL? I can't think of many, really. Like, I just feel like there's a mistake every week. Like, they're all crap. Like, I don't even know what to say. That they're just, the only thing I'll enjoy is the downfall of the PGMOL and like replacement by a competent body. Like, honestly, I don't know what else to say. Like, it's just, I have zero respect for them. Like, you watch the Champions League and all the games go without any major commotion or drama, and then you watch the Premier League and it's like they want to be center stage, be head of the newspaper headlines, be, you know, under the floodlights on the televised fixtures, whether it's, you know, keep an eye out. It's always the 12:30, 5:30 Saturday games. It's always the Monday games. It's always the Sunday televised games. Any game that's televised, like, oh, you know, my friend gave 14 yellows yesterday, brand new record. Oh, it's Sunday and I'm on TV. Let me make a record on my own. 7 yellows in the first half, most ever in the first half. It's just a fucking clown show. I'm sorry, but like, that's all I can tell you, Lucy. I don't have any enjoyable memories. I just think they're absolutely atrocious. But because we're running out of time, we'll keep going. Tiggy Taylor, Bruno to Johnson or Roll?
I'd roll.
I think I'd roll Tiggy as well.
I do think mentally you have to. So like, if you own Bruno, you have to commit to this run. Like, and when I mean the run, I don't mean Aston Villa away, but generally speaking, the 3-4 games after that as well. So if you're comfortable doing that and you're okay mentally with keeping Bruno for the foreseeable, then keep him. But if he's really annoying you now and you just don't want to play without him, like, this is the best game week to take him out of your team technically, because it is the poor fixture from the run. So yeah, but I would roll because I'm someone who's comfortable owning Bruno. I say this as a non-Bruno owner, but yeah.
Let's so just a few more here. So Christopher says, what do you guys think about skipping Haaland until game week 9? I have a few more problems to sort out without using free transfers to get Haaland in. And the plan originally was to get Haaland back in 7. But also that he's done incredibly well.
Yeah.
Oh, no, the other way around. Okay, I misread that. He said sold Haaland in game week 3, but it worked out as I'm from. Oh, no, it did work out.
It has worked out.
2.5 million all the way up to 96k. So he's worked out. The sales worked. He's got up from 2.5 million to 96k, which is an incredible place to be now. But after selling in game week 3, he was going to buy back in game week 7. And he wants to know, like, can I just wait till game week 9? Basically, that Southampton home fixture.
Yeah. Personally, I know this sounds crazy, but I actually know some analytics friends who are generally considering a free hit 9 and not going Haaland and just getting him for the free hit. But
it's starting to come out, isn't it? Like, I know Simon mentioned it 2 weeks ago, and it's like he's keeping it open as an option till game week 8.
But if you're not that psychopathic, I suppose, then I do think that this is the best game week to bring him in if you're absolutely set on having him for 9, because these 3 games are probably his best run of games over the next 12, I would say. So if you bring him on 9, ironically, I think I'd rather actually have Salah post 9 than Haaland. So that's why I don't love the idea of just bringing him on 9.
Like just waiting till that final week. It's almost like that gives the free hit more credence to the strategy in that week.
Potentially.
And there is a triple captain option. So if you get him in 7, then maybe that's worth it. But if you get him in 9, then it's like, are you going to triple captain him? Because that's an option. So what else do we have? We have Barwa Simp says Captain Salah, Saka, Havertz. Don't have Haaland. It's Saka for me. Yeah, it's Saka for me. I can't look past him. Is Foden back on the scene from Chat Sport? So I saw some headlines from The Athletic. They've become very much a tabloid these days, sadly. I used to really like them as good journalism before. But so they said something along the lines of Foden's back in form or some shit like that. And I was like, okay, like, so what? Like, you score a goal and you're in form? Like, is that how it works these days? Like, it just takes one goal and then you're back in form and like Pep's going to start you every game suddenly? Because I'm yet to see a proper game from him in the Premier League. So the fixtures are unreal, right? But I know some people who are going for him this week. They're trying to get early. They're saying that there's nothing they've seen that makes them want to go early, but they just want to be there, get a ticket on the ride in case. You've obviously got the double defense. Many managers have double defense. I have Haaland and Lewis. I kept that third slot open. There was always the opportunity of like Diaz to Foden if it came something that I wanted to do. And it's like, I guess this question almost resonates with me now because it's like, so at 9.3 million, I think 9.2 million, whatever it is, like, is it too early this game?
No, I think I'd do it. I would jump on it.
You would just go if you had the free City slot.
You have to know there's a bit of a risk to it, but I would definitely jump on this opportunity. And it goes back to as I said, like this 3-game run is amazing. So if you're ever going to do it, then might as well do it now.
So it's almost like regardless of like whether we think he'll start or not, it's like he is someone you believe can do it off the bench, like because he's not looked great this season, right? He's now got the goal. Like
I mean, like if you told me he was coming off the bench, I'd say no. But I think I would actually anticipate him to start this weekend. But yeah, if you find out, obviously, and there's a league, for example, that he's benched, then yeah, don't go there.
Let me see what time they play, because I know that's something that we said Liverpool's the first game of the game week, right? At 12:30 on Saturday. Oh, God. Man City play at 3 p.m. Okay. At least they don't play on Sunday, so there's still some hope.
And it is a home game as well, so you never know. We might get a leak.
Yeah. So let's final few. So Chat Sport says, I'll be keeping Bruno, holding for all his price drops. Podner says, I had Bruno as my last holdout, and he got the -2, which in the end doesn't get reversed, even though the card was. Colm said, don't worry, I'm captaining Haaland this week, so he's not offended by what I said about Man City pasting Fulham. I apologize, my friend. And then just a few final comments that have come in since, and we'll get out of here. So what do we have? We have... to make sure we not miss any questions, we always try to answer everyone's questions here. So any final ones? I think Christopher added some stuff about his buying Haaland in game week 7 or 9 situation. I have Robinson, Dunk, and Eze. I want to get Guardiola or Gabriel in and get Mbuemo for Eze. The other way, I'm selling Salah and 2 others to get him. So yeah, so there's a lot of moves for him to get there, which is why I guess he's thinking like, should I just skip Haaland this week and not have to use 3-4 transfers to get there and just like slowly work my way there in game week 9. I think I would just go now. Say if we're saying Foden is a potential bandwagon to jump on just for these 3 weeks, despite how he's been this season, then Haaland to me seems like a no-brainer if there was any point this season that it wasn't. And you're doing incredibly rank-wise, right? So for me, you've gone from 2.5 million after selling Haaland to 96k. And if I was at your rank at this game week, I would just like protect my rank going forwards and just like try to never fall out the top 100k again and just stay here now and keep going. And so I would minimize my risk profile would go down if I started well. That's what I'm getting at. But yeah, thank you so much for coming, Fran. It's been amazing to catch up with you. Thank you for staying an extra half an hour as well to do all the Q&A. Very popular guest. Everyone wants to know your opinion. Yeah, I'll be back next. Actually, I might not be back next Wednesday. It's an international break. I might be back the week after. So I will look into that and put the schedule out on Twitter. But yeah, guys, do check out Fran's YouTube channel if you've been living under a rock. As I mentioned, I love his cheat sheets. I love his deadline streams. Just his content in general. Even before he did FPL, we were talking about his style before. So if you missed the episode, the beginning of it, go back to the timestamps. You can learn more about where he started out with the kind of football analytics and actually talking more about football rather than FPL and how he got into FPL. So he definitely has a very good hybrid way of playing, which incorporates kind of the eye test. He tries to watch every game still, but he does have a more analytical approach, which I find fascinating, this hybrid way. I think that's the way to be. You take the best of both worlds. And yeah, thanks everyone in the chat. And Fran, I don't know if there's any last words, anything you want to say, anything you want to plug, any stuff you've got going on, any new videos you're going to publish soon that you want to shout about?
No, not at all. I think just thank you for having me. Please subscribe to the channel here and hopefully come on another time.
Love that, man. Thank you so much. Hopefully I will see you at the October 19th FPL meets after the international break. Anyone in London in the chat, do pop along and visit. We'll be at the Thirsty Bear in London, Waterloo, SE1 9LX. We've got like the upstairs. There's going to be probably 20, 30, maybe 40 FPL managers. We watched 12:30 and 5:30 games at Soccer Saturday at 3. And it's just really nice. You get to meet other people who love the game and really casual, super welcoming. If you've come and say hi to me. I'll introduce you to everyone. And there's lots of new people each time, as well as some returning regulars. And there's what you call it, shuffleboard there. It's just great fun. We get 20% off all food and drinks. Like, it's a very warm, welcoming environment. It's nice to enjoy either the red arrow or the green arrow with other people who are as obsessed about the game as you are. So yeah, pleasure. Lovely to see everyone. And we'll see you soon, Fran. And thanks again for coming on, and have a great Champions League night, guys. Go enjoy some entertaining matches tonight and see you next time. Peace.